Rick.
20 fun.
Dude, we're legal drinking age.
We are. We made it.
We made it.
Cheers.
So, Sláinte.
All right, Brendan. Welcome. It's a new day.
It's a great day.
How are you doing?
I mean, shoot. What's there to complain about?
Wow. Yeah.
I mean, nothing.
You feeling pretty good?
Feeling good.
All right. Well, I guess we're just going to hop into this,
Let's
then.
buckle up because we're going. Who was our guest?
Dr. Dan Conroy-Beam. He's a professor from UCSB, and he does a lot of research in mate preference and mate selection.
That's right.
Brendan, did you want to expand on that a little bit for people who haven't listened to the episode?
Sure. We talked a lot about how he analyzes the preferences that people have and what's gone into existing mate selection in a way of almost reverse engineering how they could have come to those choices. And then he tries to make a model that would predict in a pool of simulated individuals who would match with the same mate based on those preferences. So it's pretty cool. And they actually have a pretty, I mean, this is incredibly difficult to do, right?
Yeah.
But they actually, like, you know, I think the sample that he was even experimenting with, like of 100 people, they were able to get like 70%, I believe he said.
Yeah, it was
like
something like that.
Exact matches, which is remarkable. Like that you can, just based off of identification of preferences and like hierarchy within those preferences. And yeah, so it's pretty cool.
Yeah, that you're talking about the couples experiment to where, so the sample consisted of couples, and they took their preferences, put them into a simulation, and then had them be random and saw whether or not that they would find each other again within the simulation.
Correct.
Right. And that's like the 70% that they did find each other.
They were 70% of the time they were able to replicate the same couples.
Yes. That's,
No, okay, that wasn't right. 70% of the couples came back together, not 70% of the time. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
still pretty cool.
That is really cool.
Yeah.
And there are some intricacies that I don't even know if I want to dive into with that. Because the coding aspect of that, and I don't know. It's probably pretty basic. Probably not. I don't.
Well, it's well out of my range.
Well out of my range as well.
Yeah.
So, Brendan, do you have anything that jumped out at you?
I mean, it was just so cool to think about from an evolutionary perspective what types of things instinctively get factored in. But then, like, on one level, like, there's a very instinctive drive that is kind of like underlying everybody's like searching for a mate and all of that. But then on the other end, there's like this unbelievably complex system, especially in the modern environment, of how many people we're exposed to, and then the complete randomness of who we interact with.
Yeah.
Like the variability that we're subject to in the modern mate choice world is incredible.
Yeah.
Like the vastness is almost not comprehensible.
Yeah. I'm curious about how many people in relationships today have had known their partner before they were like actually intimate.
Yeah, that's a good point. Like who knew who they were prior on some varying level of interaction from knowing them really well and then, you know, settling down together later, or just knowing of that person and then somehow reconnecting later in life and then it working out.
Yeah. Instead of just meeting them in a new place, hitting it off, staying together forever.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, you know, like when I think about I saw a funny meme today, actually. It was something along the lines of like when you're 30 and in the dating market, like you're not finding people because nobody's looking for you. Or something like that. Some shady like meme or something like that. But no, it's interesting to think about because I think when you get older, it becomes increasingly more difficult. And I'm going to piece together like a few separated themes and ideals socially and kind of like come to a conclusion here. Like, I mean, we've talked about before how crazy the world environment is right now. Like, you can't trust a damn thing you read on the internet. Like, you don't know who the hell you're talking to on social media. So everybody's constantly guarded, and I feel like we get into these very defensive, you know, we're probably constantly pushed to like over exaggerate or lie about certain scenarios. Man, there's really something to be said about meeting somebody when you're younger, or at least knowing who they are and feeling like you really understand who that person is. Mm-hmm. And I think in the modern landscape, again, with the high variability and number of options, and like there's plenty of fish in the sea, like that old saying, like knowing somebody before and when you're younger and like growing up with them in some sense, you know, not necessarily like being friends and growing up that way, but there's a huge trust factor that I think, and a comfort factor that comes from knowing a little bit of the depth of history behind a person that you want to settle down with, right? It's a risky thing to join your life with somebody.
Yeah.
You know, and if you're in your 30s and you're meeting somebody from across the country, like that takes two, you know, highly trusting people to enter that relationship like at their maximum. You know what I mean? Whereas like if you knew the person and you understand that person and you like are committed to like developing yourself and that person at the same time and together, I think it's a much more high quality bond that comes out of that.
Yeah, I guess just from an evolutionary perspective, it was never
as necessary, right?
Yeah.
It was, yes, safety, understanding, and the trust. But I would also say that now more than ever, trust is important because you aren't in the same tribe. You would have known everybody in the past. So that wouldn't really have even been a factor. But now we have to like go seek that out in a much more deliberate way that I feel like could be a big cause for, you know, the declining, you know, solid marriage rates and the divorce rates and all that, right?
Yeah. I remember some type of research. I don't remember the experiment specifically, but it was dealing with familiarity and how, like, if you were to just see somebody once, not know who they are, and then they were compared with somebody else that you've never seen before, you'd be more likely to like select that person that you've seen or attribute them as nicer or kinder than the person that you've never seen before.
You mean even if it's just somebody that looks like somebody you know?
No, if this is just some random person, but if you've seen them before.
But you didn't register that you saw them?
You registered that you saw them.
Okay.
And so there's just that hint of familiarity.
Just that familiarity puts people at ease.
Yes.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. And I don't remember the specifics of that experiment, but I remember that, yeah, just that like one interaction of like visibly seeing that person's face was something that set off some type of comfort to where they would select them or attribute them as more positive than the opposite person who was possibly more dangerous or possibly nicer.
Yeah.
Very interesting.
It is very interesting.
Yeah. Okay, so I wanted to dive into this topic. We discussed this in the conversation. I'll give a brief explanation for people who haven't listened. But so Dr. Conroy-Beam explained that there were kind of two like key theories in terms of how we go about mate selection or how we think about mate preference. And he identified the weighted sum as the first one. And that consists of identifying specific qualities that you're really into about a person and that you think very highly of. And then if the person that you're looking for has one of those and it's the one that you prefer the most, then you really like that person because they really express that quality. The second one was the ideal prototype, to where we configure this ideal person in our minds and then compare that person in our minds to all of the potential partners that we have in the world. And that's how we go about basing where we think we are with our preference of that potential mate. Brendan, I shared a little bit about my bit. I can go on about that in this conversation about what I think is more fitting for me. But what's more fitting for you?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I want to say it's probably a combination, to be honest, to like give you the boring answer.
Boo.
But I think it's a combo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think I've definitely, like, if I think back on how much did both of those play out in reality for me, I'd say they both are like real. They were both factors.
Did one outweigh the other at all?
I don't know. It's a hard one to tell, like, because I think my subconscious could have been working in ways that I probably wasn't as attuned to in the moment.
Look at that.
You like that?
Yeah.
Shout out to our episode before, Dr. Conroy-Beam.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think if I was telling you what high school Brendan was thinking about, it was like, just being in the dating market, and like you get out there and like you kind of, I think it's easier to visualize because I don't know enough, like honestly, like you don't know enough about yourself yet in high school, right? So then it's a lot of growth and development. I would say it probably started as what was the second one?
The ideal prototype.
The ideal prototype. But then it evolves into, okay, now if this relationship is going to last, the preference quality hierarchy ranking system, and making sure that there's enough of them there that, like, justify your happiness, right? Like, make sure you're happy in the relationship that you're in. So I'd say both, but in different phases and in different times, different levels of maturity, different levels of insightfulness. Yeah. I think they're both important, actually. I don't think it would be, but again, then that transitions almost out of what Dan's work is really about, mate choice, right? Choice is like, in my mind, that's the first step. Like to make the selection, but then like to carry out your life with the person that you've picked is a whole different realm. That's kind of not his expertise, but yeah, I'd say both.
It's a good answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm not going all willy nilly. I'm going to give you a real answer.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. Another thing that I heard recently in the like topic of like the purpose, like the evolutionary purpose of like a spousal relationship is really for the like the self-development. So the way I heard it described is like the underlying forces that lie within like a good, healthy relationship are two individuals who see something, so you and your spouse look at each other and you see something in the other person that you admire about them and that you like about them, and that you and then you gain this vested interest in wanting to make that person the best person that they can possibly be, and they feel the same way. They have a vested interest in making you the best person you can possibly be, and then you carry out your life doing that. You know what I mean? And I feel like that's a really interesting way of thinking about those types of choices, because like that's really what it is. And like through two people trying to make each other and themselves the best person they could possibly be, a lot of good things come out of that. And I think that's met with lots of challenges along the way, obviously. But I'm curious how much people think of it in that sense when we look at things like divorce rates, right? Like they're crazy high. And there's probably a missing element of that where people aren't thinking that deeply about the choices that they make.
Well, that I feel like explains divorce pretty well. Like once that aspect that you described of like really wanting the other person to succeed and better themselves is wiped out, like I could totally see how a divorce could follow suit.
Right. You're no longer looking out for the other person as much as you are yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah.
That's a conversation and topic that I think would be really interesting to get into the divorce rates, why they've spiked so much.
Yeah.
What is going on with relationships?
There's a lot of research around like the decline of spirituality with that too. Not like any particular religion or whatever, but just a lack of ability to express spirituality and a lack of spiritual communities to like that. I think they're positive forces in people's lives, right? When they find themselves in a spiritual community with other people and in that community, I think it's a good positive force for people. But as people lose their trust in the traditional faiths and don't have alternative options, we find ourselves in a position where those positive forces are not existing in people's lives, and therefore their relationships are much easier to lose hope in.
What is spirituality? Would you generally define it as a belief in something bigger than yourself?
I honestly don't know that I have a really great answer for that because I feel like it deserves a really good definition. I would say that's definitely an element.
Like, how is one spiritual and how is one not spiritual?
I would say spirituality is a almost like a commitment and understanding that there's more at play and at work in the world than you're capable of understanding, in a sense. And I think spirituality comes out in the moments where people grapple with those ideas and those things that are almost not understandable and try to come to sense with them in some way. And that can be in a wide variety of methods. That could be meditation. That could be through, deep philosophical conversation. It could be through spiritual religious practice. But I think spirituality is like the navigating of exploring and coming to terms with like those great unknowns that are out there.
Yeah. I feel like I've been deep into this, or at least I'm at like an existential point right now in my life. I feel like throughout the conversations that we've had and then seeing just like different media posts or even just like different theories and research, I'm like, man, are we right? Like, are we right about this stuff? Like we do science and there's a scientific method and it has a very strong basis and there's psychometrics and statistics and all that good stuff.
Is it just a bunch of try-hard stuff that we're like missing the point?
Yeah. I don't know. I guess I'm wanting to cling to like, is this true? And that's just not the case. Like most scientists and the researchers that we've had on, they're like, well, we don't know for sure, but this is what the research shows. Right. And I love that. I respect that a lot.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
But it also leaves me
claim
hanging.
You have an answer unless you genuinely do.
Yeah. Right. Which that's my thing. Does anybody genuinely have an answer?
I think the better question is, does anybody genuinely have an answer that satisfies what you may feel or already believe?
Yeah.
I think the bigger question is, how much are you willing to allow your perspective to change to match the answer some people seem to have?
Well, that's what I'm saying. Like, everybody's answer is personal.
Yeah, for sure. Spirituality is highly personal, I would say.
I don't know if I like it.
Another interesting thing is that I heard somebody like compare and contrast like the classical philosophical topics and literature to like psychology and psychotherapy and things of that nature as both being very much so in the same same vein of like seeking a deeper understanding of things that are very difficult to understand, right? Like it's a highly spiritual, explorative field of psychology, and like philosophy is a much more generalized, less scientific maybe, but still very much so like theoretical in the way that you like test and run hypotheses and make observations. But it was funny because this person who I was watching this interview of was getting interviewed, and they said they almost went into psychology, but they didn't, and they ended up going towards like classical literature and philosophy. And the person who was interviewing them was like, "Well, you're talking the same thing. You were driven by the same drive of spirituality. You just decided that there was a better way to scratch your own itch. Then psychology wasn't that, and it was through like ancient philosophical teachings and writings and ways of learning."
Wow. I like that. So thinking about spirituality, because I know that like in our modern world today, spirituality has separated itself from just being religious, right?
Yeah.
But the way you described spirituality makes a lot of sense just about the origins of religion for me, and thinking that people were struggling with these questions, struggling with the unknown, and we're like, hey, I really want to try to figure this out. These are some of my hunches and thoughts, and then let's throw some bullshit on top of that, and let's make this something that we all believe in.
Yeah, I don't know, it's like even because I've been really caught up lately in these. Are you familiar with I don't think I'm going to say this right, but the Eleusinian mysteries from ancient Greece?
No, that's a word though.
Yeah. It's about the town of Eleusis in Greece, where that became like the spiritual hub of ancient Greece, like pre-major religion. And it was really like a religion in a way of the time. And Eleusis was a place where a lot of scholars have really dug deep into this now, and they're finding that a majority of the spiritual practices that were being taken part in were going hand in hand with like some form of psychedelic experience.
Wow.
That was like kind of bridging them to this mindset of like connecting with this spiritual transcendent energy in a way that they never were able to do before. And like through technology and being able to understand like the things that are in some of these ancient like pottery and bowls and things like that, they found that there's a high likelihood that a lot of the ancient traditions in Greece and the timing of it is very likely to have been in place pre-Christianity, and then as Christianity developed, they may have adopted a lot of these things. So like the body and blood of Christ in the Catholic Mass is obviously a symbolic ritual that happens in the Mass, but they've also discovered that could have been a practice in these in Eleusis in ancient Greece that would have been like a spiked wine, where they would have done that to like, they say that there's so much incredible symbolism, but like that, you're taking in the body and the blood of Christ. Like that's the language that we use. And a lot of the ways they probably would have spiked this wine, alcohol, we call them spirits, right? For a very intentional reason, because you're ingesting the spirit of something that takes you psychologically, it changes you in the moment. And then the bread, the blood, or the body and blood of Christ. So the body being bread, or the host in the, another thing, calling it the host, that's another interesting term we use.
God,
but also the fact that, if you know anything about the Salem witch trials, the mold that was growing on their bread back in the day was laced with a fungus that was similar to LSD. And that's what was going on with the Salem witch trials. So they hypothesized that this combination of a little bit of alcohol and a little bit of the fungus that grew on this bread was giving them this experience that was making them like come to this like highly spiritual, and Eleusis was a hub for these experiences. And they were like the masters of taking people through these like really deep rituals with ergot is the name of the fungus that they were using there. So yeah, it's super fascinating. And yeah, the symbolism and the way that we use words and then the kind of like lose their meaning. Another one that I heard recently, and I think this lends itself right into this whole like spirituality versus in modern times kind of discussion, is another really common Christian phrasing that gets put out there a lot is the meek shall inherit the earth. And there's been a lot of, when I heard that growing up, it was the meek meaning like the people, like the quiet, unassuming, like the people who are just like, you almost think of it as weak when you hear it, right?
Oh yeah.
Like, and it's a very confusing phrase, but I heard somebody who did a new translation on the word meek, and to give a metaphor for what it probably means, something along the lines of somebody who is trained with the sword but knows when to use it. Doesn't just wield their sword like out of control, but somebody who's very conscious and intentional of when to use the sword and keeps it sheathed most of the time, because it's about that like sense of understanding and control and very, monkish kind of tendencies to like be very introspective. So I thought that was an interesting translation too.
There's something about moving slow, like silently and slowly. I believe that was one of the 48 laws of power, was like move silently and slowly so that nobody knows what your intentions are. And this might be stretching it a little bit, but I do think there's something to that. Like, I feel like once you start to say like what your next moves are, even if it's like a positive thing, like if I was going to say, oh, Brennan, I'm going to go do this, or I have plans to do this. I have plans to, build an empire or something.
Yeah.
I don't know. Then like you start getting critiques from it. Like if I was just to like slowly, silently make moves and get this thing done, I don't know. I guess there's less distractions.
You almost invite doubt.
Yeah.
And
I think that's what I'm getting at.
When you verbalize it in certain instances, like especially when you proclaim something that may be a little bit audacious, right?
Yeah.
If it's something that like everybody thinks you can do or you've done a million times, it's nothing. But if you are going to set out to do something that would be, of high accomplishment, yeah, you invite criticism when you put it out there.
Yeah.
And makes it all the more challenging to like wrestle with that.
And you now informed others of how to like tear it down or how to stop you pretty much too.
Yeah.
Because now they know what you're doing. But yeah, man, that's a really interesting one.
Yeah.
The meek.
Yeah. It's very interesting. And I've told you obviously about the word sin before and what that meaning of like being translated to missing the mark.
Yeah, that is
like,
fascinating too.
Yeah. And how everybody should have like an aim in their life. And yeah, it's very interesting.
It is. The symbolism is really amazing. And I'm really sad that my Catholic education did not teach me anything about the symbolism.
Yeah, I'm even like curious, even just like ancient Greece, right? Like one of the hardest things for me to do is to consistently think through our history books and think of two separate circumstances that are being presented to me, but then try and picture them on the same timeline, right? Like ancient Greek philosophers are BC. So like where were these ancient Greek Stoic, where was the intersection with the history of Christianity? You know what I mean? Like, cause they overlapped.
Yeah.
There's no doubt that they had an intersection, but I have no clue what that intersection would be or would look like, because there had to have been a point where the ancient Greek methods, the philosophies, Stoicism, all of that like at some point had to have either butted heads or was adopted by Christianity, or somehow they were intertwined in some kind of major way. And I feel like that's an unbelievably fascinating thing to explore.
Yeah.
'Cause
that is
another thing that I really like talking about the Greeks and some of the other stuff is just like the idea of the way that they were so dedicated to the developing the self, and like both physically and mentally, like, the development of schools and like the Socratic method and like inquiry in general, right? But then also the physical, like the body, and how, one of the biggest physical practices out there back in those days was wrestling. Like people wrestled together.
Oh yeah.
And
Greco-Roman.
yeah, Greco-Roman wrestling and all of that. So it's interesting that they were wrestling with each other and wrestling with like ideas, and like this idea of wrestling was like, and just grappling with things was so entrenched in who they were. And it, like, another piece of symbolism was the closest translation I've been able to find for Pluto was the broad-shouldered one, which is so interesting because he was not only broad in his ability to grapple with people, because he was actually a really like respected wrestler of the time, but he was also one of the most respected thinkers also. So like it just goes, like, it's interesting the way the names kind of come to be.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's just a huge piece of history that I feel like is missed in all of this.
Well, in 1,000 years, they'll have a lot of data and records from what we're doing because we now have technology.
Yeah.
So hopefully from this point on, we can actually learn more from history, and it can be spread to the masses.
More people get access, so we can synthesize more of that information and come to hopefully some conclusions that we already probably had in the first place.
That we probably had 4,000 years ago.
Yeah.
1 billion years ago.
Yeah. Well, and it makes me think too, like this whole idea that you were talking about a while ago about like doing less.
Oh man, subtracting.
I mean? And just the power of taking away rather than like what do you have to add to make this thing better, like as a general thought process that a lot of people go through. But like, man, sometimes like, and I think that's to your point, right? Sometimes we get so caught up in the new theories and philosophies and sciences and whatever that are trying to answer a bunch of like existential questions, but maybe it's just less.
Maybe. This is something that I think about a lot with my clinical work, like as a therapist. Like I think it's easy for a lot of clinicians to think like I'm not doing enough, and I need to add something onto this. When maybe that's just going to mess things up. Like I need to add another coping mechanism or another like mindfulness skill or something, or some type of theoretical component. And I'm like, man, maybe we should cut it back and just be like, hey, just be real with this person. Like just really try to be a good person to this person. And of course there's other intricacies and details that need to go at play, but yeah, instead of adding all these things, like maybe we do need to subtract in so many different ways of our life.
I mean, it's such the only way I can think that this regularly gets brought up in daily life is the 80-20 principle. Are you familiar with that?
I don't know.
It's like the idea where like if you're trying to solve a problem or like figure things out, a lot of times people will do it in like sales, but it's like, it's the idea that 20% of your whatever is going to get of your inputs is going to give you 80% of your results. So focus on that 20.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because you're going to get the biggest bang for your buck if you're solid there. You know what I mean? So I think that's like what you're saying is like, what 20% are we doing with our clients that is giving them the absolute most life-changing information and piece of this? And why are we not just like making sure every piece of that we're squeaking out rather than adding 7 other things and then it just gets diluted and then you're taking away from that 80 and the 20% can't even achieve the 80 anymore. You know what I mean? Dude, a lot of,
Yes. This book, The Power of Showing Up, written by Dan Siegel and Tina Payne Bryson. They've written multiple books. They've written The Whole Brain and The Yes Brain, and it's all about like child development and how to show up for your child. And this is the most recent one they wrote, The Power of Showing Up. And the other books, The Whole Brain Child and The Yes Brain, kind of detail a lot of like the neurological processes of brain development and how to really care for children and promote their development. And they're great. They're amazing. And he subtracted with this book by saying like, if you show up consistently in an empathic way, like your kid's probably going to have a pretty good development. You just need to show up. You need to be there.
Yeah.
Like, almost forget what I said before. Like,
Yeah.
if you can add that stuff, please do.
Yeah.
But this subtract piece, oh man, it is so essential to our world, and it's something that I've been thinking about a lot. And yes, listeners, if there's something that you feel like you're stressed about or you're doing too much of, think about taking something away from it. Because that is something that I've been thinking about the past like 2 months, and I feel like I've added so much stuff to my life that I have so much that I can take away.
Yeah.
It's beautiful process. All right, Brendan.
All right.
This has been nice.
We started off well on topic and we got way off topic,
Like always.
but it was great.
I don't know if we've ever stayed on topic consistently throughout the entire thing.
It would honestly be a shame if we did.
Yeah, that one would probably suck.
Yeah.
All right, well, we have 2 guests on our next episode, and it's a bit of a different topic. Nothing that we've explored before. And it's, just stay tuned.
Yeah. We're getting out there.
We're getting out there. All right, everybody. Have a good night, evening, morning, weekend, whatever you're listening this to.
Wherever this finds you, we hope it's a great one.
Yes. See ya.